Katherine at Bean here from All Hands on Deck. And today I'm joined by a PFFA ambassador, actually, Roger Meacock, who is a vet. And we're going to be having a discussion today about bird flu. It's been in the news a lot in the US. We're starting to hear rumblings a little bit more here in the UK. And there's a lot of people who aren't quite sure what that looks like. Is this real? What does it mean? What are the implications? Why are they using PCR tests, etc. But what I'm going to do is first off ask Roger to kindly introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background. So firstly, hello, Roger, and thank you so much for joining me today. Lovely to have you here.
Hi, Katherine. Yeah, no, thanks for inviting me on and also asking me to be an ambassador for PFFA as well, obviously. We got sort of quite common interests, I think, in regenerative farming and pushing that, because I think that's ultimately the way it's got to go. But my background is, I qualified in the early 90s and went into farm only practice. And then during the whole BSE situation, I think it really dawned on me then that the government was really not interested in farming, and was, even back then, was starting to push farmers out. And so I sort of widened my scope, sort of went down to the New Forest and worked in sort of farm and equine practice, although I predominantly did the farm work there, and then sort of discovered various different natural healing solutions and techniques and things, and decided that they worked better than what I was doing, but they weren't always as appropriate for farming situations, perhaps, although I think that, my view on that has changed a little bit. So I sort of concentrated on the horses, dogs, and then, because a lot of the technology was developed for treating people, I sort of did a parallel human practitioner as well as a natural vet. So I treat people as well. And yeah, so that's sort of my background. Was very awake from very early on in 2020 that the whole COVID thing was being pushed out of proportion and that something very wrong was going on. And then sort of, obviously we're all in lockdown and had plenty of time to dive down rabbit holes, and I learnt quite a lot from a couple of sort of doctors like Richard Fleming and Dr. Kevin McCairn, who spoke about the spike protein and how dangerous it was, and how it had been engineered. And from that, when I then heard that the mRNA jabs were going to be, getting the body to produce the spike protein, that sort of alerted my the alarm bells, shall we say, even more. And obviously, from the veterinary point of view, there had already been some work done on mRNA in animals, and so I decided that maybe preemption was better than waiting for things to happen. So I wrote an open letter of concern to the Veterinary Medicines Directive, basically explaining in detail, with all the scientific background, my concerns for the mRNA as a whole platform, and the dangers that I think they can potentially introduce. And yeah, that's put that up on my website, and people can read it there and can sort of see the response and my comments and things, and the reason why I'm concerned as well. But obviously, we're sort of now moving into the next sort of potential pandemic situation with avian flu, and there is obviously already concerns that they're looking at doing an mRNA jab for avian flu as well. So I think that's probably roughly where we sort of cross paths.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, we've heard, or we've seen, and we've read articles and interviews from the US, whereby they've already culled an awful lot of birds, allegedly on the back of the bird flu, and we're talking millions in certain states. And we're reading stories now that they're suggesting that bird flu is jumping from poultry into cattle, into livestock, and in turn, apparently, I think there's been 2 or allegedly 3 cases where now that virus, that bird flu, has jumped from then the livestock to humans. What other, in terms of your point of view, and obviously we've only got so much information that's been put in front of us publicly, but as a vet, what are your thoughts on this alleged bird flu? Do you think this is genuine? Because from my point of view as a layman, what I see happening is a narrative being built very, very similarly as it was to COVID. We know that in the US, they're already injecting certain animals with mRNA tech, particularly pigs. We've seen stories on that they've already started that. Do you, as a vet, see this as a genuine concern for farmers, poultry farmers, livestock farmers, or would you, or you're more inclined to think this potentially could be another narrative rolled out, because we know that the control mechanisms and the centralized forces that are in place would have no problem with taking far great control of our food production systems? Where are you at as a vet, Roger? What does this look like for you?
I think sort of as a very general overview, I think it's being blown out of proportion. As with a lot of things, there's a little bit of truth and a lot of embellishment going on. You know, there's no doubt there is avian flu. You know, it's been around for quite a few years, and the whole influenza virus situation originated from birds. So even human flu, you know, at some point back in evolution times, evolved from bird flu in some way, shape, or form. And then there are various different types of bird flu. So you've got your H5N1, which is a bit like it's the protein on the surface of the virus that is used to determine what the different strains are. But there are also within that sort of H5N1 categorization, there's also subtypes, if you like. So you've got highly pathogenic strains and you've got low pathogenicity strains. And the high pathogenicity strains can cause quite serious illness in birds. It's got very infectious, it can cause severe illness, and it can then obviously cause high mortality. But then you've also got the low pathogenicity strains where the birds pretty well, they recover. So there are those situations, and there have been a few, literally handful of cases over the last 20 odd years where I think it was primarily in China, where you probably had people who were on low wage, poor nutrition, working very closely with lots of birds, that there was an outbreak, probably wasn't picked up on very quickly. So they hit quite a viral challenge, and with low immunity themselves, they then, unfortunately got bird flu. But in terms of the West, I don't think it's pretty well happened over here. And even as I can, I've sort of been a bit like you, been sort of looking at some of the different podcasts and videos about it going around. And from what I can gather in the States, the sample wasn't even found in the respiratory tract of the cattle. It was taken from an eyeball or from an eye swab. It was diagnosed by PCR, which Carrie Mullis, who developed the PCR test, said should never be used as a diagnostic test. And the way PCR works is basically you keep on cycling it. So you do sort of a set of procedures to amplify what's there, and you keep on doing it to keep on amplifying everything. And the more you do, obviously, it's easier to detect something that was originally there in a very, very low level in the original sample. So what has happened is that once you get above something like 25 cycles, the chances of the original sample being infectious is pretty well zero. My understanding is that PCR cycle is being done up to 40 times. And so they are detecting remnants, and it doesn't even have to be the whole virus, because it's just looking for a sequence of amino acids. So it could quite possibly be that an avian flu, got into the cow's eye, the immune system dealt with it, there are still some remnants of it there, and then that's been swabbed and taken and been blamed, for being the cause. And there was one doctor who had a very good analogy of it, and she said, it's like if I find a hair sample from a dog that died 10 years ago, you know, down the back of the sofa, and then I amplify that up and go, oh, look, DNA from my dog, it's alive. You know, that is effectively what is going on. So it's there's a big doubt as to how much the infection was genuine. You know, if they were showing respiratory symptoms, there are other causes of respiratory symptoms in cattle that might well have been concurrent, and most respiratory infections, I'd say, are multifactorial anyway. So there may be some viruses there, there may be some bacteria there. They found supposedly by PCR again in raw milk and also in pasteurized milk, but they're sort of conveniently ignoring the pasteurized milk finding and talking about just the raw milk. Some cats, I think, was again, we had cat flu, but because they were fed the milk. Okay, so if you find it in milk, you're going to find it in the cat. So maybe, you know, but where did it come from and how complete, how infectious was it? You know, all those important questions aren't being addressed. So there's a lot of hype. As far as I'm aware, none of the dairy workers who are working with the farms with the cattle have contracted anything.
Although that I did see a report the other day, sorry to interrupt you, Roger, just so people are aware, I read a report from the US the other day that on a particular farm, which I think is well known as being a huge industrial unit, effectively, they're thinking of mandating their farm workers to take the bird flu jab. I kid you not.
Yeah.
And it's actually a dairy farm. It's a dairy farm.
It's you know, there are so many factors to it. I mean, even if a strain, to be able to become that infectious in people, there has to be the sort of mutation occurring that actually really idealizes it, adapts it to that human transfer, and that hasn't been demonstrated. It doesn't, you know, so the risk is very, very low, and it's the difference between having and being infected with, you know, you can carry, I mean, we all carry all sorts of pathogens on us within our microbiome, but once the microbiome is balanced, they're not a problem. You know, we've all got a bit of E. coli in us, we've probably got a bit of Pseudomonas, we've all got a bit of everything. You know, we've all got Staph aureus on us, but it doesn't mean that we're infected or infectious. And you know, the microbiome includes the virome as well. So there are viruses within that microbiome which we carry around, and we know that the birds, you know, they're going to, if they've got respiratory infection and you know they're putting it into the air, then it's quite possible. Or if they're feeding, going into feeding areas and trying to steal some grains or something from the cattle feed, then you know, if they're infectious and they've got some snot, for want of a better word, you know, and it goes into the feed, then so you know the cows can pick it up. And if you know, if it's dusty, then that would explain how it got into the eye. But you know, there's a huge difference between carrying and being infectious, and I do feel that there is something coming down the track where they're looking for an excuse to call a new pandemic. They are setting the groundwork to do it with avian flu. I mean, they tried it before, didn't they? I mean, this isn't the first time they tried to make something out of avian flu, and then swine flu before that. So, you know, and pigs are a bit of a mixing bowl for flu as well. So, you know, I do think there is a scenario where, if you listen to Geert van den Bosch, if anybody's listened to him, he's a vet qualified vaccinologist, been working in the industry for 40 years, even worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates and Gavi. But he's been calling out the dangers of the mRNA jab right from the start. And he believes that there is a variant that's been effectively pressure put on the mutations to bring forth a COVID variant that could escape the immune system for those who've had multiple jabs. And if they get the degree of illness that he's predicting, it wouldn't surprise me if they then the authorities try to fob that off and saying this is avian flu.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, it's
absolutely,
a way of
absolutely.
covering them for admitting that anything they've done in the past, any of their decisions have caused any sort of vulnerability. And of course, anything that damages the immune system, whether it's something that someone's already got an autoimmune disease or they've damaged their immune system by any other way, you know, that is going to facilitate any sort of illness. So it might well be that, you know, some bird flu is potentially more infectious for those people who have damaged their immune systems. But, you know, that I still think even there, the risk is pretty low. And certainly the risk of mortality, I think, is incredibly low. And any justification for mass vaccination on the back of that is highly dubious. And if they want to use an mRNA platform, then as far as I'm concerned, it's just inherently fraught with danger and should be resisted to all degree.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, Roger. And I personally do believe they're coming for the food. They're coming to control the food. I think they want to eradicate our opportunity to utilize animal proteins in our diets and give them greater control, and probably, you know, not help farmers along the way. Let's face it, they want control of the farmland as well. Based on what I've seen and the evidence put in front of me, that's my personal opinion on it. If you were a poultry farmer in the UK and you were hearing these stories and you were getting a little bit concerned, actually, hang on a minute, you know, they've talked about this a couple of times in the UK. It sounds like they've got it going on in the US. Personally, I think it's complete lies, but that's my personal opinion. If you're a poultry farmer in the UK, what would you be doing right now to potentially protect your flock from any virus that allegedly might be circulating, and B, how would you protect yourself if, for example, Defra turned up at the gate and said, okay, we want to come and check your birds, we want to either deliver an mRNA jab? I mean, what would be your thought process as a poultry, or even if they went that far as the livestock, as a livestock farmer, what would be your thinking at the moment?
It's a difficult situation, isn't it? Because obviously, you know, Defra have got, you know, they're looking out for public health from their point of view, but they've also got responsibility to not overreact as well. And we know from foot and mouth in the past that doesn't always happen, and that overreaction, to put it mildly, absolutely happened. Certainly in terms of bird security, those who are free range, you know, what can you do? You know, wild birds are going to fly over the top. All you can do is minimize the contact with the wild bird populations as much as possible where feasible, but there is always going to be a risk. The vaccination one is an interesting one, because the immune system of birds doesn't mature until sort of 6 to 8 weeks, and yet so many of the certainly of the meat broilers for, you know, for the meat industry are being slaughtered sort of, you know, before that. So what is the viability of a vaccination anyway, given that they've got you know, that they've got their immune system isn't developed? You know, if they can't fight an infection, how can they respond to a vaccine? And I would argue that maybe even the stress of vaccination, if they were, you know, already born, is going to be, you know, is more likely to depress the immune system and make illness more of a problem as well. There's also the question, I think, that a lot of the vaccines are raised in chicken eggs. So if you're going to be injecting something immunogenic into a bird that's been raised in a chicken egg, you know, what's the contamination likely? You know, what's the chances of some sort of autoimmune response and all the rest of it? So And, you know, as I pointed out in the open letter of concern about the whole mRNA platform, you know, they're choosing a protein of interest to get the body to try and produce, but they do no work, and certainly insufficient time passes before they're being injected to decide whether those proteins are going to be prionogenic, i.e. they cause some sort of prion disease like mad cow disease, BSE, or some sort of other issue. So as far as I'm concerned, anything injected that's been developed less than the normal time to develop vaccines in the past, that don't give sufficient time for adverse reactions to be properly assessed long term, then I think they have to be regarded as experimental and potentially hazardous. And once you start doing that with the food chain, as you say, there is danger as to what might be produced in the food chain. And people might think that's just to do with meat, but actually the latest work that they've been doing in the States on chronic wasting disease in deer is that it is perfectly possible for infected deer to defecate on the ground, for that to be broken down, for the plants to uptake prions via their root system and redistribute it into their leaves, and for then other deer to eat those plants and potentially become infected with prions by that route. So, you know, given that slurry is often used on fields for fertilizing crops, then we have to consider the risk that once you start infecting the land with prions, you are potentially opening Pandora's box and letting the genie out of the bottle, that would produce potentially mass infectious food with prions, which, you know, as we know, cause neurological problems, variable onset. But, you know, eating one greeny leaf probably isn't going to give it to you. But if your diet is based on ingredients which are totally harvested from variety of crops that all contain prions, then the cumulative dose over time is going to be a problem. And we know that prions are pretty well indestructible. So cooking and all those sorts of things and freezing doesn't work, because some of the samples that they used when they were checking this latest work on the chronic wasting disease, now the samples have been stored at -80 degrees for years. So we are playing with biology at our peril. The medication that was a straight chemical is one ball game. But once you start using biological interventions, i.e. mRNA or viruses to carry something, or bacteria to carry something, you are messing in ways that we do not fully understand, because we don't understand the body to that degree. And we have no idea what will manifest. And I just think of some of those projects they've done in the past, where they've tried to introduce biological controls for pests and things. And what often happens is what they introduce as the best control becomes a pest itself in time. And, that's sort of the macro situation of what we could potentially be introducing into our animals, and potentially, obviously, because of the food chain, into humans as well. So, it is just utter madness, and purely driven by money. And my concern, obviously, because the uptake of mRNA in people has dropped following what people have witnessed in adverse responses so far, the government has bought hugely into contracts with Moderna and Pfizer for mRNA products, and they're trying to make the UK to be a leader in the whole mRNA platform. And my concern is that if they can't persuade the public to keep taking mRNA jabs, then they will try and fulfill their contractual obligations by shifting the focus to the veterinary side. And my concern when I did my open letter was that I contacted various organizations in the farming side and also in the veterinary side and asked them to, assess what Dr. Kevin McCann and I had written in our open letter and all the science references and everything. And we asked them to co-sign and put their, express their concerns. And not one of them was prepared to do it. And it transpires that the reason why they didn't was because they didn't understand it. So if they don't understand it, sticking your head in the sand, especially for something like this, just isn't a safe option. And if the veterinary profession and and the rest aren't prepared to do the right thing and stand up and express their concerns when this sorts of legislation or interventions are being put forward, then the farming community needs to educate itself and be aware of the dangers and discuss it with your vet and say, look, if you don't understand it personally, then look at what Roger's written, go to the website, read it, point out where, have a look at the science. If you don't understand it, then you're just going to have to accept it. And if you do understand it, then you'll have the same concerns. And then you won't want to be part and parcel of that process of administering something that we really shouldn't be administering.
Yeah, absolutely. And the horror stories coming from the US in terms of the fact that there's a couple of companies who produce salad crops and veg crops, and they're spraying mRNA on the salad and the veg. They're determined to try and get it into us somehow, and that going into the food system is the one that daunts me the most, because they obviously changed legislation, and I can't remember the full wording of it, but they changed legislation around the time of COVID, I think, and it meant that in terms of labeling, there were far less restrictive or controlled on how much information you had to put on there. Before that, you had to announce a lot of information in terms of food labeling, whereas now they don't have to so much. And I worry that they'll get the mRNA into the food system, and those products won't have to be labeled with the fact that they're an mRNA product, and people won't know what to buy, which is why another reason, if you can connect with your farmer and create that relationship and help guide them in the right direction so they don't go down this path, you can at least then get produce that you can trust, that is healthy and safe. In terms of the PCR, Roger, a couple of people have written to me and said, what about if Defra want tests done? What about if we do our own tests? We find tests that work and we send it off to an independent lab and get the independent results done. What are your thoughts on this? Because for me, I've got a sneaky feeling if they're anything like the mindset that we dealt with in 2021, 22, they're going to say, sorry, no, it's got to be our tests. Not necessarily a good reason as to why, but it's got to be our tests. We've got to do it. What are your thoughts on that? If farmers or producers independently wanted to get tests done rather than allowing the Defra PCR test process to happen, what are your thoughts on how that would look?
I don't know how it would be legislated, but certainly I would imagine, what happened with the NHS, for example, was they had a set protocol for how the test needed to be done. And that included the number of cycles of the PCR. So if farmers can find a laboratory who are prepared to do an independent test, obviously they'd have to pay for that. It's then a question of whether that laboratory would be bound to follow the instructions handed out by Defra in terms of how that test was administered. But there would be nothing potentially to say for a farmer to say to one of those labs, look, okay, so if the test says the protocol comes from Defra to say you have to do it in this way, what I want you to do is, okay, if they tell you to cycle it 40 times, you've got to do 40 times or whatever it is. But what I want you to do is at the 25th cycle,
what does that look like?
What does that look like?
Yeah.
And if that comes back negative, then the farmers have got a very strong argument backed by science to then say to Defra, if they turn up on their doorstep, look, I've had this test done, you're cycling it 40 times. Carrie Mullis, who developed the PCR, said it shouldn't be used in this way. And the general consensus amongst the scientific community is once you get past 20, 23, 25, whatever cycles it is, that it's not viable, whatever it means that the original sample cannot have been infectious to the level that you're implying, and therefore I do not accept that my herd or flock is infected, and I do not accept any mandatory intervention. And the difficulty, I suppose, is going to be is how quickly those samples could be turned around.
Yeah.
And the same with any laboratory testing. They're only, how long does that result stay, stay appropriate? Because if it takes 2 days to do a test, then Defra could potentially turn around and go, okay, well that result is valid for 2 days ago, but what about now?
Yeah.
And what's the situation now? And that's the really difficult situation. I think it would need, and maybe if there are some farmers who are fairly know some high-powered lawyers out there, what we need to do is actually to get some sort of wording that says, okay, I agree to have the vaccination provided you can satisfy and guarantee the following criteria, and then have a list of things. Can you prove that this is safe? Can you prove that this level of cycling, PCR cycling, actually means that there's infectious material there? Can you prove that this strain can actually physically pass to humans? Can you prove that this strain is high pathogenicity or low pathogenicity? There'll be various different criteria that could potentially be put down in there. And if the answer is no, then if you can't satisfy all these different criteria, then I'm sorry, but this legal injunction that we've taken out means you cannot inject. But whether that's even a legal possibility, I don't know.
I'll have to maybe look into that.
Something that someone in the farming community or legal who's watching this who says this is my specialist area. Yeah, we can. I'm awake and I'm concerned too. Because we all need to be, because it's all of our food is potentially at risk here, and not just us, but those who've got kids or grandchildren as well. They're going to be at risk too. I
mean, this frightens me more. I wasn't remotely frightened in 2020 or 2021. I felt very, very confident. I knew from the word go we would not be taking anything injected into us. It would not be happening. And I had control over that. Not at any point did I feel that the pressure was too much, that I had to cave in. There were no mandates. I wasn't mandated. So I still felt quite confident. I still felt an element of control. I did still feel an element of autonomy. That I had a right to stand up. What I fear about this is this can easily be slipped under the radar into the food system, and we would not know. We have no say. We have no voice on that point. So back in 2020, everyone knows I've been awake for donkey's years, so I've had lots and lots of time to think about it. Now, it was on my radar in 2020 that they might, once they come for the humans, I felt they might come for the animals. I always felt that it would come for the food supply in one way or another, which is why I went ahead and did PFFA and other things. And so I went and met with a load of ex-military vets and had a chat with them and said, look, should Defra start making things difficult and coming after our meat, coming after our farm animals, coming after our produce, and we needed a group of people to stand at the farmer said, look, I can't deal with this on my own. I don't want Defra on site. I don't want them coming. I don't believe what they're telling me. I see them as a threat. I see them as here to intimidate me, etc., etc. What do I do? And so I spoke to these vets and I said, if we're in this situation, would you guard the gate? Would you just stand there, know your legal rights? We're not doing anything unlawful. We're not doing anything violent. We're not doing anything aggressive at all. We're just not complying. We're just saying, no, thank you. Off you go. Doodle pip. Bye-bye. And guard the gate and back that farmer up. And I've got and I parked it, stuck it in my back pocket. I had PHA to get going, and then PFFA and other things that I've been working on. And I parked it. And in the last month or 2 months, have had this really strong urge to pull that out the back pocket and start looking at it. And I've drawn it up and I've sent it off to our ambassadors and others and asked them to have a look at it. And everyone who's come back has been very, very pro. They see now that this may be something that's needed. So what I'm going to say to you guys out there is we are putting together a campaign called Guard the Gate. It's very much remaining within the law. We're very much going to be doing the right thing, but doing it in a very peaceful and calm manner. And what we're looking to do is organise networks across the UK. Speak to your local farmer. We are going to put together some fact sheets. I'm going to kindly ask Roger, who I haven't mentioned it to yet, to give us a hand in putting together those fact sheets so that actually you can go and have a chat with your farmer and say, did you know this, and this is coming down the line by the looks of it? This is actually the evidence we've got at the moment that this isn't entirely true. These are our concerns with the PCR test they're using as a diagnostic tool. You are lawfully within your right to say, blah, blah, blah. By the way, could we set up a local WhatsApp group, Telegram group, whatever floats your boat, of local people who are really interested in helping our farmer out? And if he sends a message, SOS, and says, look, Defra are coming down the track, you guys come down, park cars up and calm and peacefully guard the gate and don't let them on site. Roger, do you think we'll get to the stage where potentially we might have to bring something like that into play to protect our food system and to protect our farmers and their cattle?
I hope not, but I don't know is the honest answer. I think, you know, it wouldn't surprise me on another level because you know, thank God the World Health Organization pandemic treaty didn't go through, but the international health regulations
The amendments went through. Yeah.
And I haven't checked all of those out to exactly see what is in them. So I know certainly in the pandemic treaty, there was talk of their One Health policy, which obviously would include the ability of the World Health Organization to mandate activity, you know, on the veterinary side if they wanted to decree that the pandemic source was in animals, and they've already made noises which are ridiculous along those lines, that all diseases from humans come from animals, which is ridiculous. But the fact of the matter is they've made those noises, and if within the international health regulations, which we are already signed up to, so the amendments didn't have to be passed by Parliament, they just became part of the existing treaty that's already in place. But if there is something along the One Health lines within that would give them, or Tedros on his own, to protect, you know, the potential to mandate something on the veterinary front, then, you know, then there is a, you know, in theory that we would be honor bound through international law to change other laws here. So it wouldn't change the laws here automatically, but it would force the government, unless they wanted to break international law, to bring that legislation in here and exceed. And we know that there is mRNA already being developed, as you said, in the animals. There is already a product that's been in use in pigs in the USA since 2018, which somehow got through as a vaccine, even before they changed the definition of a vaccine. So that's the level of corruption that happened for that to occur. I've also heard that in, I think it's New South Wales government's announcement in Australia, that they are now in production.
Yes, yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
border disease in sheep, and they're looking to do something for lumpy skin disease, and also mentioned TB. So obviously TB would be the holy grail for them, because there's, you know, it's worldwide and a huge financial implications there. But obviously, as we've already said, the whole mRNA platform is inherently dangerous. And, you know, I'm not the only person saying it, and, you know, people a lot more highly qualified within the scientific community saying that too. So, you know, it's not an extreme view by any means. It's what the research has shown, and on the basis of how they work and what's happened so far with mRNA products, we know that the dangers are very real. So absolutely, I think we've got to be very aware of what might be coming down the track, and even the conventional vaccines for avian flu. You know, we know that.
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but one of our contacts went to get his son a tetanus jab in a hospital in England a couple of weeks ago. And it was only at the last minute that it dawned on Dad. I think son had knocked himself in a rusty nail or something had happened. And it was only the last minute it dawned on Dad as they're about to deliver it. And he said, that's not an mRNA jab, is it? It is. The tetanus now they're delivering in the UK is an mRNA jab. He apparently jumped straight on the call to one of our practitioners and says, I don't want them having this jab. I can't get them a normal tetanus. What do I do? And she said, absolutely high dose vitamin C. She said she gave him the particular milligrams or whatever it was he was supposed to take. And he turned around to the doctor and he said, right, I've been told to give high dose vitamin C and that'll be equally as good as a tetanus. And the guy went, yeah, it would. It's these things, they're just coming in under the radar. And I think one of the most important things is for us to put it on people's radar to say, look, what you choose to do is your choice. We absolutely believe in the autonomy of decision for this, but you have to have the full info. You have to have as much information as is available in order to make an informed decision or supply informed consent, which obviously is an issue that we saw happening in 21-22. So, Roger, thank you so much for your time. I think what we'll probably do is end up following this up maybe in a month or so, because I've got a feeling more is going to come down the track on this one. Yeah. And it's really important, you guys out there, that if you can share this with any farmers, producers, smallholders, anyone who keeps poultry, just so that they can start understanding that some of us have some concerns with what is being suggested in the mainstream, what we think will come through from Defra, and where this might go. And in order to be able to make sharp decisions, you've got to have all the information. And that's something that we couldn't get out so well in 2021, and maybe since then it's not been so easy. So do share this out there. Roger, thank you so much for your time, my friend. I will be nabbing you to help put together some fact sheets that we can get in front of farmers and poultry keepers so they start to understand things a little bit better. And then you out there, the people on the ground, it's absolutely all our responsibilities to ensure that we do alert those around us to the facts that we have in front of us, or full frontal of facts that we have in front of us, so they can make that decision. And if you have a farmer in your community who suddenly turns around and says, bit concerned about this, can I get some help? You be there to support them, or send them in our direction, and one of our guys will get in contact with them and help guide them and support them through that process, that decision-making process, because this is so important. If the mRNA gets into our food supply, we are not probably going to know about it. We're not going to know what food's got it, what food hasn't, and it's going to make it so difficult for us to avoid. There's so many of us out there who do not want this. There's so many of us out there who fought really hard to make sure we are not in a position whereby we're getting products in our system we don't want. And this is actually, for me personally, this is my line in the sand. This is where I think we've got to actually have our voices heard. So we will bring more information. We will do some fact sheets. We will get that out to you. Keep an eye out on the PFFA website and social media. And Roger, again, thank you so much for your time, my friend. I'm so grateful for all the information, and I've got no doubt I'll have you back on really soon.
No problem. Thanks, Katherine.
Good luck, everyone. God bless, and we'll see you on the other side. Take care.